Hello, this is Matt Burns from the University of Missouri, and today we're talking about systems and organizational change. This is actually a pretty complex topic, and we're going to have to do this over several short videos. But we're going to first start off by thinking about previous systems and previous change in which you've been involved and really wonder why do reforms fail. And there's lots of reasons why that could be the case. Part of it could be reforms fail because we didn't do them at the right time. In education, we are constantly engaged in a series of reform. We are, every year it seems like there's some new big initiative that we're trying, and there's a long history in education of reforms and major initiatives failing. And I'm sure if you thought about it, you could think of several from your own experience. But why do they fail? Well, in organizational theory and systems theory, one reason is we don't do it at the right time. This says, of course, changes, next exit. Change is inevitable, reform is inevitable, but when should it happen? Wave theory suggests that we tend to go through, any initiative tends to go through a series of waves. And the time to start the next thing is not when you're down in the bottom, it's when you're right about at your peak. That's when you should start the next. So when the new thing is institutionalized, that's when you start your next change. And oftentimes in schools, we don't think about changing until we're down here. And at that point, it's really too late. If we try and change here, we're not ready for that yet. So right about in here, I actually think this is a little too low. Right about in here is when we should start thinking about that. So when we see a new thing happening, there's excitement, enthusiasm, and then it's becoming institutionalized, and enthusiasm starts to wane, right there is when you start the next thing. And waiting here until things are bad is too late. So number one, we sometimes wait to do reform too late, or we start it too early. Number two, we don't consider the complexity of the change. Why is that? Well, we're school psychologists and special educators. And in school psychology and special education, we see this a lot. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. We think we change the antecedent, changes the behavior, changes the consequence, etc. Well, yes, that's true, especially for individual humans, but when you think about systems change, the model really looks a little more like this. The antecedent behavior consequence approach doesn't quite fit. I'm not saying don't use it, I'm saying it doesn't quite fit when you start talking about systems change. That's a much more complex process. So let's start by talking about a few important things. Number one, what is a system? A system is the orderly combination of two or more individuals whose interaction produces a desired outcome. Now, a system is different than an organization. A system there can be organizations within a system, and there can be systems within an organization. A system is any combination of individuals working to do something, a desired outcome. So if it's a school and there are, say 10 teachers, there could be 5 systems, there could be 6 systems. There could be a system for every grade level, the teachers for those grade level. There could be the special ed teachers. There could be lots of different systems within that organization. And one of the first steps in identifying in organizational and systems change is to really think about what those systems are. To identify where are the systems, and I would argue where are the leaders too, because the leaders aren't always the ones with the title. Everyone knows of a school in which there was a teacher who sort of was the one who kind of ran the show. So I stop and think, what are the systems in this organization that I'm trying to change? And who are the leaders, and who are the ones I need to help facilitate and lead the change? And then I would argue for implementing a model. Edelman and Taylor, it's a classic model. I would argue still a good one of creating readiness, initial implementation, institutionalization, and ongoing evolution. We'll talk about that in another video. So we have to consider the system, adopt a model, and create a sense of urgency. And again, I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit too. We have to create a sense of urgency. And one thing I always do is I create mission and vision statements. I'm a big advocate for those. Anytime I'm in a leadership position, the first thing I do is think about the mission and the vision of that organization. And For those of you who don't know this, I was an associate dean. I've been president of a state association. I've been editor of a journal, and actually a couple of journals, and I've been a director of a research center. So I've had lots of experience in leadership positions. Every single time, the first thing I did was help create a mission and a vision statement. And then we blew that up. We put it on a big, big piece of paper. And every time we met, we had that up. And every conversation, every decision had to come back to reflect the mission and vision. So I talk about sense of urgency. We look at the mission and vision, and sometimes just that creates a sense of urgency, because there'll be a sense of buying into the vision, what they want to be. And if there isn't, just looking at, is there a difference between current practice and our mission and vision? I work with core teams, 5 to 8 are good, and I'll come back to this idea in a second, those who implement. But I encourage you to create sense of urgency, to get people involved who ask the hard questions. Don't always get, when you're thinking of systems change and you're in the planning phase, don't get everyone who's enthusiastic and agrees. Get the person who asks you the hard questions, the person who sits in the back of the room and makes negative comments all the time. That's the person you want on your committee. I'll come back to the why does this matter later. And then lastly, Saracen, a famous psychologist in this area, said he thinks the main reason organizational and systems change fails is that they don't consider the implementers. He said that reform is often an endorsement of current practice. So we say, hey, this is a new thing, and we actually just give it a different name. We see that all the time. I won't give examples, but I'll give one. There was whole language for a long time, and then whole language sort of lost favor, and we started calling it, so then we developed this thing called balanced literacy, which in essence became whole language, and now we're calling it guided reading. Now, for those of you who are working in schools who might see this, might sort of get offended, and I'll simply say this: guided reading is a great way to teach kids how to read. If you go back and read the original Fontes and Pinnell book in 1995, I think it was, it's really good about how to do good guided reading. Problem is, when I was director of the Minnesota Center for Reading Research, we'd go out and do reading audits. And we look to see, are we seeing, almost everyone said they do guided reading. So we get out that book and we had a rubric and we try and see, are we seeing guided reading? And rarely did we see actual guided reading. I can think of only twice in my entire career where I saw something I thought was really, truly guided reading. It was instead balanced literacy, which was instead whole language. So we do that all the time in education. In order for change to occur, we have to address the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of those who actually implement the change. And if we don't, the change is doomed to failure. So when I talk systems change, of course, I think urgency, we adopt a model, and we identify the systems, and then we start thinking about the implementers. In my opinion, systems change is oftentimes successful or not based on the team. So I'm going to stop there for now. That was an overview of systems change. And next, we're going to talk about how to create or modify or work with a team as part of systems change.